Joyce, we are going to help so many people today because
Maybe even ourselves.
exactly. We are going to talk about how to handle an argument in a more healthy, biblical way. So, I mean, we all have arguments. We all have disagreements. Nobody thinks the same way. Some are, of course, bigger and harder to work through than others. But when something comes up, you know, maybe it's you and your spouse, maybe it's you and a coworker or an adult child, whatever it may be, it never feels good. I mean, you always feel like, how do we settle this?
Right.
So one of the things that someone mentioned as we were talking about this is just, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to think about it. I'm just going to avoid it. Is that a good way to handle an argument?
Well, first of all, if you do that, you're not going to have an argument because nobody's talking about anything. But I think I'd like to say first, what constitutes an argument? You know, just disagreeing about something does not have to become an argument. Sometimes I'll tell Dave, you know, we had an argument about this or that, and he'll say, we weren't arguing, we were just discussing it.
Yeah.
And the problem about discussing it is when you start discussing it real loudly, you know, the louder you get, then it can become an argument.
Or when your words begin to hurt.
Or when your words begin to hurt. But I think some of the guidelines in how to have a discussion that doesn't have to become a bad argument is, first of all, know when to shut up.
Okay, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
That's not an easy one.
Sometimes you can avoid a lot of arguments by just not having to have an opinion. And some people are just so opinionated. They have to have an opinion about everything. And when you're married to somebody for a long time, you learn what you're going to win at and what you're not going to win at. And so there are certain things with Dave that I've just learned, just don't, if you have an opinion, just keep it to yourself, because saying something is just going to cause him to say something, then I'm going to say something, then he's going to say something, and then the octaves of our voice are going to just keep rising. So,
and it may not serve any purpose.
And it may not serve any purpose, you know. And so the second thing I would say is if you have to have some humility. You have to not always assume that you're right. You know, we all think we're right, but I do a teaching called I Think I'm Right, but I May Be Wrong. And even just that, even just to think, well, you know, I feel like I'm right, I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. I mean, that in itself can help you have a decent conversation about something.
Right.
Because if you're not going to listen to what the other person has to say, then you have a closed mind, and it's really just pride because you've already assumed that you're right, so there's really no point.
So try to listen with an open heart to learn something in the conversation.
And the Bible actually says that you're a fool if you won't do that. You know, that you to listen to what somebody's saying, because we all have things to learn. And we all, you know, we all need to learn how to listen and not feel like it's the end of the world if we find out that we're wrong about something. But, you know, if you think about it, now like Dave and I, of course, have been married 56 years. And I remember how much we used to argue. And now that is very, very rare. And so a lot of it just comes from the things I'm saying. You don't always have to have an opinion. And if you do have an opinion, you don't always have to voice your opinion. A lot of times you can avoid a lot of stuff by just shutting up. And even if you're in a conversation and you can tell it's headed in the wrong direction, that's the time to just, you can end it by just not having anything else to say. Or just, you know, if I think Dave's wrong about something, I don't always have to tell him I think he's wrong. I can just be quiet, because a lot of times, what does it matter? Why, you know, why do we, our son David says now, which I think is, it's an important statement. He said, I finally learned that being right is highly overrated. So when you think about it, why is it so important for us to feel right? What,
Yeah.
you know, maybe that's because we feel so wrong about ourselves that we want to have just this little bit of feeling right. And really, if you're confident and secure, you don't have to try to convince somebody that you're right. And probably the number one thing that is a problem in marriage is communication. People just don't know how to communicate respectfully. What I just said is really the key. We don't know how to communicate respectfully. And so if I have a different opinion than you, then I don't, if I'm not really looking for a solution, but I'm just looking to convince you I'm right,
Right.
then it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
So humility, learning when to be quiet. What have you learned?
It's very interesting because I grew up in a family that, we would have healthy debate. And, we would enjoy it. We would talk politics, we would talk whatever. And it was not contentious. And if it got that way, then it did stop, because if it's not serving you any purpose, then it doesn't do any good to continue. But my husband, Tim, didn't grow up in an atmosphere like that. So when we would begin that, he would get uncomfortable and feel like this isn't good. So then I had to learn how to adjust so that I didn't make him uncomfortable. He had to learn how to adjust a little bit so, we could talk about things in a healthy way. So I've learned a lot through this process, and not always by it going really well, through some arguments that should not and did not necessarily have to become that. But there are important things that we have to learn how to talk about in a healthy, productive way. And I think what you said about respect and doing it in love is such a foundational point.
Really, everybody has a right to their opinion. And we need to respect their right to have their opinion. And I grew up in a house that was full of arguing, but none of it was healthy debate. It was just my dad was an angry man, and really a lot of times there wasn't much of an argument because he was going to have his way no matter what.
Yeah.
And of course, I didn't say much of anything because I would either get slapped or told to shut up or whatever. So it was very hard being a type A personality to never have any kind of freedom to be who I was, to always have to come under somebody else's authority that was wrong most of the time.
Unjust.
Unjust, but just would never admit it.
Yeah.
And I think coming out of that situation, I was so full of wanting to voice my opinion that then I felt like I had to have an opinion about everything. And I teased Dave and tell him I knew I married Mr. Right. I just didn't know his first name was always. And, to be honest, and this is not picking on men, I honestly believe this is something God has put in them. They may get it out of balance, but most men always think they're right about everything. I don't know if Tim's like that, but
I'll be completely honest. Tim is a little that way, but I may be more that way than he is.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know me, so
I'm always willing to say I'm sorry, because I can't stand strife. I mean, I grew up in a house of strife, and of course, we had a lot of it in our marriage in the beginning years, but now that I've learned strife is actually really dangerous.
It is.
God can only work in an atmosphere of peace. And if we want our lives to be blessed, then we need to learn how to navigate differences of opinion peacefully and respectfully.
Yeah.
Unity doesn't mean that you always feel the same way about everything. But
that's an important point.
I just keep coming back to this respect. It's so important to talk to people with a respectful tone, to talk to them with respectful words, and even saying things like, I respect your right to have your opinion. Dave and I have learned how to disagree agreeably. You don't have
Exactly,
to.
yeah.
You and I are good friends, but we're not going to agree about everything. I mean, there's so many differences in people And so I just think for people watching, especially people that are trying to, when you're married, you have to talk about things. You can't not talk about things. And you're not going to always feel the same way about everything. You know, compromise is good sometimes. You know, well, you have part of what you want, and I'll have part of what I want, and we'll get along. But there's so many decisions you have to make together about kids, about finances, about whatever. And there has to be some give and take, or there's just going to be war all the time.
You're right.
And so it's very important to learn. You know, the Bible says a soft answer turns away wrath. So voice tones have so much a part to play in these conversations. I mean, you can say something and sound like a smart aleck, or you can say it in a respectful tone. And that really, the tone of voice that you use is extremely important. And so,
And if you have to take a break to be able to regain that, or whatever you need to do, step away. Like you said, just be quiet.
yeah, I've actually been having conversations with Dave that I could tell was going in the wrong direction, and I would just say, I'll be back in a minute, I need to go to the bathroom. Because I had to go to the bathroom and have a talk with myself before I could go back and continue the talk with him.
Sure, yeah.
Because I could feel myself getting defensive and not being willing to be pliable or to admit that I was wrong. And I actually will say, all right, Joyce, knock it off. Let's just lay down the pride. God help me have a humble spirit here. I don't want to argue. If I'm wrong, help me be willing to admit it. So it is good sometimes just to walk away and kind of redirect and get it right. So
That's something that God's really helped me with, especially like in the, I don't know, past 15 years or so, you know, just been working with things on me, is a desire to be right, thinking you're right. It doesn't mean you are right.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter what people think you know. I
Right.
mean, because all those things that you think are so important, they need to know that I know this, or they need to know that I was right about it. None of those things matter. And being able to lay those things down and to treat people respectfully and in love, it really does change a lot. And when it's not that natural instinct, I mean, you can see it in 3 and 4 year olds, you know.
Right. Oh, yeah.
It's just not how we come out.
Right.
So it's something that God has to teach us along the way.
Yeah, and I do believe God has just put it in my heart. If you don't have to try to prove you're right, what difference does it make if they think you're wrong? If you need, and this is the important part, if you need to be proven to be in the right, let me take care of that. Because God can do that. So we just want people to be happy and peaceful and get along.
It makes every day better. Thank you. you.